Hello there. Today, One Cancer Place introduces you to a poignant story of a person, one of a series of personal stories that provides a peek into the authentic life of a cancer patient. We hope that you find the magic in these unique stories because each of these lives is lived to the hilt in service for others and in deep gratitude for survival. One Cancer Place, the newest patient-led community, leads the way in delivering the revolution in cancer care to its growing membership of cancer stakeholders and patients. Find and connect with us online at onecancerplace.org. Hi, I'm Lindsay, and today I am here with Chris White.
My name is Christopher White, and I was diagnosed with metastatic mucosal melanoma.
Okay, so tell me what was going on with your life at the time that you found out and what that actually means for your body to have that kind of cancer.
Most definitely. So I was 36 years old at the time. This was in the summer of 2018. And I was a new home construction manager. I'd been doing that for a few years, really honing into, career mode where you work at least, 6 days a week. But that was my life. I was so engaged and engulfed in career that I didn't have any other focus, in terms of myself and my body. It was all about work. And so in the beginning of 2018, I started getting some symptoms down in my rectum is if, I was just extra sweaty. It just didn't make much sense. And so shortly after that, I started developing a bump on the rim of my rectum. And I at first just thought it might have been like some sort of zit or something like in that nature. And then it continued to grow. And so I was assuming it was possibly a hemorrhoid or something of that nature. And so I just figured, when the time comes, I'll just get over and get some cream and, it'll take care of itself. And just going into career mode, I didn't take the time out to go to the doctor. I had full insurance and everything. And then within a few months after that, I had a lump that grew in my right groin. And when that started, same thing. I assumed that it was, nothing of any concern. And as it continued to grow, that's when I decided, hey, I should really go get this checked out. I still wasn't even concerned about the lump on my rectum at the moment. So I go in to see the doctor for the lump in my groin. And that's what started off the journey of finding out that I ended up having anal rectal metastatic mucosal melanoma.
Wow.
And so
You were saying before that this type of cancer is not common in young people. So how long before the doctors were like, this is definitely what you have? And how did they guide you towards what kinds of treatments to look for?
Yes. So first, I just go to the general physician and he gives me some medications, antibiotics, to see if there's any reaction in the lump in my groin. And after trying 2 different meds and there being no change, he sent me over to a surgeon. And he wanted to have the surgeon, take a look at it and, get a biopsy. And so when I get to the surgeon, he tells me that he thinks that there's a chance that it could be something called a femoral hernia, which is an extremely rare hernia. But the only way to find out is to get in there and, do surgery. And so he said, if it's a hernia, then we'll repair it and everything. And if it's not, then we'll approach it as we get in there. And so I go in for surgery. And when I wake up, he tells me that it was not a hernia. It was a lymph node, but they did get clear margins. They sent it off to pathology. And so I had the entire week off of work. This was July 2nd of 2018. And the second was on a Monday. So I had a appointment for the following Thursday to go see the proctologist. And when I went in for that appointment, immediately upon first look, he asked me what my pathology was from my previous surgery that week. Said, it hadn't come back yet. Still waiting for the results. And he said, he didn't want to move any further or do anything else until he got those results because it looked like cancer. So that was the first moment that it even had crossed my mind that, hey, this could be something of that serious of nature. And so the very next day, this is on a Friday in the afternoon, I get the phone call where they say, Chris, fortunately, yes, but you have a very rare form of melanoma. It's called metastatic melanoma, and you need to go see an oncologist immediately. And so being a Friday afternoon, I called the oncologist that they recommended me to, and I was able to get in for first appointment on the following Tuesday morning. And I go in for that appointment to Texas Oncology, and immediately they were telling me that, hey, this is extremely rare, very specialized, and you need to see a specialist. So they said, we can get you a PET scan and all that, start getting the ball moving, but let's get you down to MD Anderson. And so that immediately started the ball rolling with, hey, we got to have a sense of urgency. This is extremely rare. And that just kind of set off a light in my head that said, there's a lot of unknowns. And so, let's just follow up with what the doctors are saying. And so I get down to MD Anderson a couple weeks later. And by that time, I had had the actual primary tumor from my rectum removed and that other one in my lymph node. So I had 2 surgeries and a PET scan. And I meet with the team down in MD Anderson. And that's when they tell me specifically what it is, that it's anal rectal mucosal melanoma, and that it forms in mucous membranes. It makes up 1% of all melanoma.
Wow.
But the average survival rate for this cancer is 14% for 5 years. But once it metastasized, you're looking at maybe like 9 months. Also, the average age for this diagnosis is like 70 years old. I was 36 at the time. And so they were telling me from the get-go that the way that they've been treating this type of cancer is by going through immunotherapy. I'd never even heard of immunotherapy. I had no clue what it was. Or, I'm sitting here thinking the classic, thing that I've seen through TV and heard other stories, that you get diagnosed, you have some surgery, you get all the cancer out, maybe do some radiation and chemo, and bada bing, bada boom, less than a year, you're all good, back to life. And that's what I was thinking in my head. And so once he started telling me about all the details of here's, what we're going to try to do, it was like, oh my gosh, it's a little bit more serious than, I initially thought. But the plan was, we're going to do another surgery because it had already shown to, spread from the original spot, which is in my rectum, to my lymph node, my groin. So it was locally metastasized, but it hadn't got into the organs or anything like that. So we were going to aggressively try to keep it local. So lymphodectomy was the next order for my treatment, which they put you under, and then they shoot a dye that literally follows the path of your lymph nodes. And so they were able to determine, where the possible spread would be. So they pulled about 12.5 lymph nodes between my right and left groin. About a third of those were, did have disease in it. And then it also turned out that there was still some remaining disease further into my rectum, which they were able to get removed at the same time. Following that surgery, about a month or so, I had the tube sticking out of my belly and everything to drain all the fluid, since all my lymph nodes were gone from that area. And we went in and I got dialed in for radiation. I believe it was high dose, low dose radiation, straight to my rectum. Had to get the whole tattoos, so the way they can set you up or for the specifics and all that. But right before that, I went in and did sperm banking. Haven't had any kids yet, but the radiation in that area, they told me, would destroy all my future chances for having children. So I went ahead and I made sure I got that done. And, we're going to go in for radiation. And after that, we'll do a PET scan and we'll restage you and make sure everything's good. But if everything was cool at that point, it was going to be a single dose immunotherapy plus a chemo, for like a year initially, and I'm thinking, okay, well, as long as it's all gone, I could do some follow-up treatments and everything. So no problems, no issues. And I ended up doing my radiation in October of 2018 and went in for PET scan in November. And at that meeting after my PET scan, I figured there might have been a little cancer still in my groin. I could kind of feel these little lumps that were like sunflower seeds kind of in the area. So I was like, okay, well, it's all good. Just that one area. But once I get into the meeting, and this was with the fellow, not the actual doctor, he'd come in and he starts telling me, that it had metastasized everywhere, like as if I already had known, and so, and I had no clue. And it was just like a blow to the brain. It literally, the whole shock factor just came completely back, because they pull up the screen and it was just like a Christmas tree lit up. I had metastasis to my lungs and my liver, and just left the primary area. Had all my surgeries and the radiation, but now it's up in my organs. And so it was, okay, let's switch gears. We're going to go immediately into combination immunotherapy, which would be Opdivo and Yervoy. And so, without metastasis, it would always be a single agent. But once it metastasized, it was, now we're on the chase, if you will.
Yeah. So who was with you in this part of your journey? Like, who were you talking to? Who was maybe taking you to doctor's appointments?
Yes. Both of my parents, even though they've been divorced for over 30 years, they still live locally, remarried and everything. So both of my parents, sets of parents, and also my siblings both live locally. And so I always had, if not, one set of parents or a sibling, I always had somebody with me, but most of the time it was literally my mother and my father, would take turns and stuff. And so, but we would drive all the trips from Dallas to Houston to MD Anderson. They would drive me, they would set up, the hotels, the food, like everything. But it was 100% of the time I always had either my mother or my father with me, no matter what. And then oftentimes either both of them plus either my younger sister or older brother.
Yeah. So your journey had so many ups and downs, even from the beginning. What was one of the biggest sort of, I guess, blows or challenges that you had to really get through while you were trying to, rid your body of this cancer?
Absolutely. Great question. There was a handful of things. Right after it metastasized, it literally spread, everywhere through my body, and it was such a blow. And when I left the MD Anderson to come back to Dallas, before I did that, they had given me a prescription for Xanax. It was like just overwhelming. And, so that was like, here, calm down a little bit. A couple weeks later, not even, I would say 2 weeks later, I was at work and I had some pain that I had woken up with. And throughout the day, it just got worse. And it was up in my chest, and it would spread over to, my arm and my side. And I honestly thought that I was having a heart attack. I'd never had a heart attack, but I was assuming that just all this pain, I didn't even, think that anything was correlated with the metastasis to the pain. And so I go into my local oncologist in Dallas, and she reminds me, Chris, you have metastasis everywhere, and she pulls up the screen and everything. And so she was telling me that, what I'm experiencing now is cancer-related pain. And so, they were able to take care of me that day at the hospital, but they wrote me a prescription for a fentanyl patch, 240 hydrocodone a month, plus an additional 150 Dilaudid. And so they said to wear the patch, you switch it out every 3 days, and, and then take your hydrocodone. And then if you max out of that, you take your Dilaudid for your breakthrough pain. And so since I was just given a Xanax prescription, I didn't want to be taking Xanax and opioids at the same time, probably cause me to seizure.
Yeah.
And it's just not a good thing to do. And so at that, meeting with my oncologist, when she gave me all that, my mom and everything's looking at the oncologist going like, oh my God, like he's going to overdose. He's going to get addicted. Like, this is just so much drugs, and my oncologist told my mom literally at that meeting that, we're not worried about him getting addicted. He's stage 4, terminal cancer. So, we're just worried about him living, she actually told my mom that I could only be so lucky to get addicted to where, that would mean that I lived through it and that, I could go get help, on the other side of it when that time came. I eventually later came to find out that they didn't actually believe I was going to make it, but I consciously was like, okay, they're giving me the tools. How am I going to use these? So I did not want to obviously take both Xanax and the opioids at the same time. So I just said, okay, putting shelf in the Xanax. I'm going to willingly take the opioids. And the whole thing is I need to stay ahead of the pain. And so in order to do that, it just became a regular regimen on eating all the pain meds. And so, but with being able to block out the pain, I was also able to mentally block out all of the, plaguing things that were going through my head that, I didn't want to talk about. I basically, when I was diagnosed, I kind of, had this moment where I cried in the shower. And when I got out of the shower and dried off, it was like a brand new beginning. I remember just thinking like, okay, pull yourself together. You don't know what's going to happen, but no matter what, I got to be that positivity and, the reference for everybody that, if I'm going out blazing. I'm going out with, a legacy of memory of I did everything I could. And so it was almost like, imagine how high you can fly when you feel like Superman, because with those, being able to block out all the mental stuff, I was just this utter force of positivity. And I set the tone for my family. I set the tone for the doctors, the sense of urgency. And, it was always trying to be like, no, like, I don't want to be labeled in a bucket of a possible or a maybe. I want to be labeled in the bucket of definitely going to happen. You're going to be good. And so, it's the will factor, the belief factor. You kind of will it into happening. And so being on all the pain meds kind of gave me that energy as well. And so it was a very odd dynamic because, you don't willingly go get addicted to pain medication and opioids. And, it's a giant problem in the country and in the world and everything. But this is literally why those things are designed. And so I consciously was like, I got to do what I got to do. And I got to set the tone and I got to be the person. So, that was intense.
Yeah. So I want to know what the journey to, because it's interesting, this whole talk around the medicine that you had to take versus the opioid crisis versus the crisis of, an invader inside of your body that you also have to deal with.
Right.
So what was your journey like from, using these medicines as they were intended with doctor's guidance to maybe making it past what your doctors had predicted or even, expected, to having to figure out how to, then wean yourself off of those? Or what has that been like?
Well, it's been pretty wild. I was moving through all the motions of, taking the daily opioids and just dealing with whatever I had to deal with. And, I was continuing to work. I did not want to let the whole fear, or not the fear, just the facts that, I have this terminal disease that could probably going to kill me, invade my mind. So I just wanted to stay extremely busy. So I was working constantly until, I couldn't work anymore due to, some of the side effects from some of the actual treatments I was taking. So, I got metastasized in November of 2018. I got put on all the pain meds. And at that moment, I was actually going to do the combination immunotherapies. And so I actually did 2 doses of that. And I was getting scanned for, some other checkup. And we noticed that now it also went to my kidneys along with my other organs, and it was growing out of control. So we had to stop the immunotherapy, and they put me on chemotherapy called CVD to kind of band-aid it and bring it back down. And so right after I got into doing the chemo, I was also given a single dose of Keytruda for immunotherapy. And on top of that, they wanted to do high dose, low dose radiation to my kidneys and my lungs. And so I had all this overlapping treatment. I go back and I scan and things are looking good. And so I go back to the double combo immunotherapy. And instead of, making that number 3, we started back to number 1. And so I ended up doing 4 more of those, and it actually gave me full-blown colitis. And so, to kind of mask some of the pain from all the stomach issues, I just continually, was taking all of the pain medications and to try to, just block out the actual pain and out of my mind. And so I fought through all of the colitis and everything, and I get back into action. No more immunotherapy. I go to a chemo. And anyway, so it's just all these different medicines and everything. So through all of that, the side effects is just so nasty. I just continually would take all the pain meds. And so I get up to the clinical trial status. I do everything that I'm supposed to do to get into the trial right before my baseline scans, or I go in to do my baseline scans, and they go and show me all the results, and everything's just real kind of grim. And they said, hey, now you actually have it in your brain. This kicks you out of the clinical trial. In order to get back in, you got to treat, this metastasis in your occipital lobe and show that it's in reduction or stabilized, and you can get back in. And this was an extremely tight timeline because the clinical trial was closing. So I get in and get all my radiation. I end up, after approval, get my mask made. I did 5 sessions in 4 days, scanned on Christmas Eve, which was the very last opportunity I could scan in 2019 to get back into the trial. Waited until the 2nd, flew out to Colorado, On the third, met up with the oncologist. She went over my scans and said, hey, you got pseudoprogression, but it's good enough to get you back in. So I ended up making it into the trial and got all my lymphodepletion done January 8th. I started that, did a week of that, brought my white cell count down to 0, was given my TIL on January 15th, 2020, followed by 6 doses of IL-2, which is extremely painful, and then released from the hospital. And then had my first set of scans within 6 weeks. And then after that, and within that first year, I was able to actually show that I had a complete metabolic response. But at the same time, I'm still taking the fentanyl patch. At this time, it was up to, I think, 75 milligrams. I'm still taking the maximum amount of hydrocodone I can take each day, which is like 8, the 10/325s and everything. And so in my mind, I did not want to come off of the pain meds until I was absolutely sure, that the cancer was gone, because the entire time I was going through all my treatment and everything, I always had to stay ahead of the pain. So it was just a habitual thing to do. Mm-hmm. And so, in the beginning of 2021, and it was confirmed, yes, I had a complete metabolic response. I told myself, okay, let's start trying to come off it. So over the course of 2021, I was able to wean myself off the patch, and I actively tried to, wean myself off completely of the hydrocodone. But as I was doing that, I still had some pains. And so I go into my doctor, my oncologist, and said, hey, the plan was if I made it, we were going to figure out how to get clean again and this and that. And that's when she told me, we never thought you were going to live. So she said, I'm going to have cancer-related pain. I mean, through all the different treatments that I went through, between radiation, immunotherapy, chemo, surgery, and especially the clinical trial I was in, there's, certain amount of deterioration on my body I'm just going to have, post-cancer related pains throughout my life. But it's okay to still continue to take some of the pain meds, just try to wean it down to a manageable amount or a non-addictive amount, and just use them when you need to. And I would actually, I would use cannabis to kind of supplement, a lot of the opioids if I could. And it's just, I would get to the point to where some days, I wouldn't, even have to take any of the pain meds, but I was still, I still had them and everything. And so it goes back to that, imagine how high you can fly when you feel like Superman thing. And there was no official rehab program in place or anything. It was literally here, go to the C center, and ask for a evaluation, and I went there and they told me to go into I think it's called an IOP program, but it's an outpatient, therapy where you go 3 days a week and you do group therapy. But there was no here, you're going to go live in rehab, and this and that. And, I was in my mind, I was thinking I was going to go to one of those kind of luxury rehabs, you know what I mean? I didn't want to go to feel hey, you're going to a junkie detox, and so I did the therapy and everything, but, which kind of helped me with a lot of my mental health kind of things. But still to this day, I still struggle with, the hydrocodone. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to, 100% completely come out of it. I keep telling myself I'm going to get to this point where, financially I can be in a zone to where I can, take the time and go put myself in a decent rehab and be able to, 100% come off of it. But, the whole entire time that I was going through all my treatments and everything, they always kept telling me, because of my age, I could take it. I was healthy. I was young, and so, with them reinforcing that, and to me, I was like, well, yeah, as long as, we can manage the pain, I'll do anything you ask. Yeah. So it was just this weird relationship with I was so willing to, do anything to stay alive that, I went down this rabbit hole of addiction in a sense. And, but it was all because I had to, if you can't get to the doctor appointment, you can't get the treatment. And that's literally almost how I explain it to people. I mean, if you're in that much pain, you're just, the whole will factor gets shifted around. And if you don't believe in yourself that you're going to make it, then it's hard to convince anybody else around you that's trying to help. And so it's just, it's a pretty intense struggle, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about a couple of things, but again, we're close to the time. So could you quickly tell me about the clinical trial that you were a part of, how you got in it, how you got back in it, and maybe what's going on with the trial now?
Yes, absolutely. So kind of cliff notes is it's TIL therapy, which stands for tumor infiltrating lymphocytes. And the actual TIL therapy's been around for a little bit, but not as a approved, treatment. It's always been in clinical trial status. And so when I went down to MD Anderson in 2019 after doing the Abraxane because of the chemo, because I couldn't do immunotherapy anymore, that's when MD Anderson said, okay, you can't go back to just straight combination immunotherapy. Here's your options. And it was do a single dose immunotherapy and a chemotherapy at the same time, or I could do TIL therapy. And he explained to me, what TIL therapy and everything was, which is what they do is they take a tumor, they extract it, they send it off to a lab. They're able to, pull the T cells from that and then grow them into the billions. And then that takes about a couple of weeks. And then you go into the hospital, you do a week of chemodepletion to bring your white cell count down to 0. They give you your TIL, and then they give you IL-2 to kind of activate it. And so what it basically is your TIL, or it's like Pac-Man. And all the cancers, all the dots and the cherries that Pac-Man eats, and those are all throughout your body. So, you inject all the Pac-Man into your body, and it just literally, it's like a seek and destroy mission. And it just seeks out all the, bad cells and eats them up till they're gone. And those TILs, remain in your body forever, and they continue to grow and continue to multiply. But if that same cell pops back up, it would get eaten up immediately. So it's not like you go into remission or anything, because remission essentially means that your cancer is dormant, or it's stable, or, that it's asleep. And that, to me means that there's a possibility for it to wake up at some point. The deal with my treatment was it's not even there anymore, because Pac-Man just ate it all up. And if it decided to pop up, it would get eaten before I would ever even make it to a scan. So getting into the clinical trial, you have to have more than one tumor to extract, and they have to be of a minimum size, and you have to be able to go through all the tests and everything to do the lymphodepletion, because that chemo is a pretty hard regimen to bring your white cell count down to 0. And so another easy way to explain it is it's like taking your body and taking the dial and turning it all the way down to off. And then when you get your TIL and your IL-2, it's like taking that dial and cranking it all the way to the right, like doing a hard reset. And the IL-2, they give you up to 6 doses of that. And it's a real hardcore chemo, but it's given to you to activate your TIL to kind of jumpstart them and get them moving. And so it's a very intense kind of a process. Most people don't make it through all 6. I myself did, but the whole process to do all this, literally takes probably about a month, maybe a little bit longer from the time you sign your consent to having your tumor extraction to doing all that. So when I did the process, I went down and signed my consent. I had to fly from Dallas to Colorado for that. And then I had to fly back a couple weeks later and do the surgery. And then they grew all that. And as I'm getting ready to enter the hospital, you have to do your baseline scans, so they can kind of know what to gauge off of, because you have to have one tumor, that they removed to grow your cells, and you have to have at least another one so they can kind of monitor how it's working. And so, one thing that it definitely excludes you from that is having a brain metastasis, because the membrane that separates, up in your brain and your head to the rest of your body and all those veins, it doesn't circulate the same. And so it's an immediate exclusion. So getting radiation to treat it was within literally a 14-day timeline. And you have to have insurance approval just to get get your mask made so you can do the treatments. And so imagine just literally just day by day on the phone, just doing everything you can, pleading with insurance to get approval, and it's like, it was just gut wrenching, and like the anxiety was so out the roof. And at the same time, I'm having to fill out my will, and all of this end of life stuff. And I'm just like, still to that point, I had not, really delved into everything that was going on. And again, I thought if I were to fill all this out, that's like admitting, that, hey, the cancer's winning. And I still didn't want to do it, but I still had to do it. But, the whole process with the TIL is designed is that when it works, it eradicates it. And so the clinical trial, since I was the very last person to be dosed in this trial, it was a phase 2 trial. I was in cohort 4, and they actually made a press release, when the day I got dosed, January 15th, 2020, says, that they finally dosed their last patient in the pivotal cohort 4 for the LN-144 Lifileucel and everything. And so last, they had a rolling BLA, and they had that all submitted. Everything went good. And they did that in March of this year. It was accepted through the FDA. Now they're going through official FDA approval, and they're on the fast track. And so it's slated, I think, to be approved this year in November, I think Thanksgiving weekend to be exact. And it'll be the first, frontline treatment for non-resectable solid tumors in metastatic melanoma. And not only will it be able to help folks with melanoma, but the same treatment they're going to be able to use for cervical cancer, lung cancer, breast cancer, blood cancers, any cancer that has a non-resectable solid tumor. And they're literally labeling it as a one and done. If you can qualify, and have more than one tumor and you can make it through the whole process, that, this will be the thing. You wouldn't have to do the whole step therapy to where you have to try all these other treatments that are just, are going to beat you up just to get to this one, which is what you used to have to do to get into TIL. You had to fail on everything else to finally get into that. And the whole point was, it beats you up so bad that by the time you, can qualify for the TIL, you're not strong enough to make it through the process. Mm. And so, nobody should have to do that. And, just thinking of myself, all the different treatments I did and all the side effects I permanently have, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, and my mental health, I can't have kids. I end up having cataracts from all the immunotherapy that I did prior to the TIL. And so, my vision, it's just everything. And so if you can avoid all these, maybe quote, possibly could work treatments and be able to go straight to the TIL, your quality of life would just be so much better. But fingers crossed, everything goes swell. This year, November 25th is what they're saying. FDA full approval.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, I would like to close out our conversation by talking about how you found One Cancer Place and what you, as a survivor, especially, many people who haven't been personally touched by cancer, who haven't, supported someone who is living with cancer. We hear the stories and it's like, and then the scans were clean and, it's sort of like a fairy tale ending, happily ever after. But the part that, most of us don't know about and don't hear about is the expenses post-cancer, the types of challenges that you will be living with every day that, are hard to understand because they aren't cancer. They're just results of cancer. And like survivorship is sometimes a difficult journey in and of itself, just day to day. So I would like for you to talk about how One Cancer Place is a place where you can sort of talk to other survivors about the pain, about the difficulties that you are living with after, like you said, all those other treatments that you had to go through.
Yes, absolutely. So I ended up finding One Cancer Place through LinkedIn. Over the past year or so, I just really gotten into, advocacy as a whole. And when I knew that I had a complete metabolic response, or I would tell anybody about, my experience and my story, the response, whether it was in person, over the phone, or wherever, it was really moving to me. You know what I'm saying? It was just so incredible to be like, okay, here's something that I did that is, it's really impressive to a lot of people. And my story, is really starting to see the impact of, talking about my experience, especially being that the average age of, my diagnosis is like 70 years old, and I was 36 at the time when this all happened, 37. And so I felt really good and really proud about sharing my story. And it just kind of hit me one day. It was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I would love, to literally be able to build a career out of, sharing my story, as a speaker or anything in that nature. But, my story has such a, unique dynamic of, you're thinking one thing and it's all good. And then boom, you get hit with a bat of metastasis, and going through all these treatments, you're thinking it's all good. And then, boom, it's like, I couldn't script this out if I tried, but, especially when I talk about trying to get into the clinical trial and how I did get into it, got kicked out of it, had to get back in. It's one of the most intense parts of my journey. And so the fact that like I never would, gave up on any part of, people saying, well, you might want to consider this. It was like, no, I'm not going to consider that. And I felt real good about being my own voice and my own advocate, speaking up for myself. But the whole sense of urgency is just huge. If you don't have that sense of urgency, and you're not setting that tone, then nobody else is going to follow through. And so, the whole patient voice, patient engagement, patient consulting, but the patient to patient world, instead of, the whole doctor being the leader of know-all, and everything. But over the past handful of years, the whole patient engagement has become the thing. And so, especially with social media and the internet and technology, and patients want to hear from other patients about what they did, how they did it, how it made them feel. Doctors, can talk about the patient engagement, patient experience, but to me, that's just, ludicrous, because it's like, you're not the actual patient. No other patient wants to hear it. If they had a choice, they would always want to hear from another patient. So, I'm always cruising through LinkedIn and everything, trying to figure out, okay, where are the other patient influencers? Where are the conferences at, the patient engagement? And by just doing those searches and connections and everything, I eventually came across One Cancer Place, and that's how I met Erica. And we started chatting and everything. And then before you know it, we became real cool. And I come out to Colorado every 3 months for my follow-up scans. For your clinical trial, initially you have to scan every 6 weeks, and then it's every 3 months after that for 5 years. And the whole deal is, you have to go see the same oncologist and go to the same hospital. And so I have to travel from Dallas to Colorado to Denver to go do this every 3 months. Well, when I went through my clinical trial, I got released from the hospital in January 2020. And so right after that, after, my first set of scans, before I could go back for the second set, COVID had hit. So I was able to scan in Texas and do my labs and then send the results to Colorado and then do Zoom calls. Well, all the COVID restrictions over the last year have been uplifted and everything. And so I still have to go back. And so every year, I definitely got to hit my deductible through my insurance. I first of all, I have to still maintain insurance. And so that in itself can be expensive. So airfare, everything, but the financial toxicity, it's intense, because you go through all the cancer treatment and everything, and then you finally finish your last treatment. It's like, okay, clap your hands, wipe the dust off, and, let's go. But in all reality, that's only, it's like you finished one nightmare and then you woke up in another, but that's only like the halfway point. Survivorship is literally just as important and just as intense as going through the actual treatment part of it and everything. And so being able to connect with One Cancer Place and Kappa and everything, it's like, these are the other folks that like, they just get it. You don't have to go through all the explanations that you would to anybody else that hasn't ever had an experience like that. Anybody that's been told, that your time is up or is coming up will understand this. But imagine, we all have an expiration date. We just don't know when it is. You're born with an expiration date. Nobody's eternal forever. And so getting a diagnosis, like that is basically like someone takes like an hourglass, pulls it out of their coat pocket, and finally sets it on the table. So now you can see, okay, here it is. And then they flip it over and you can see the sand running down. And so it's like, are you going to just watch it run out, or are you going to do something to maybe stop it, put it on pause? That's literally what it's like. And so being able to connect with places like One Cancer Place, it does so much for, the patient and survivorship, and just knowing that, you're not alone. And then whatever, hardships that you're going through, there's other folks, and they can kind of aid and guide and help you to, what might have worked for them and this and that. So especially with my diagnosis being so rare, and especially for my age, everything about it was just rare. I'm looking to, share my experience and help anybody that I can. Ideally, I would love to literally travel around the country and eventually the world, and just be able to talk about my experience, what worked for me, what didn't work for me, but I really feel that cell therapy, and especially like, TIL, will be a game changer in the world of cancer. no, never before have they ever advertised or talked about, being able to do a one and done, and actually call it a cure, but this is literally what it does. And since it's gonna not only be able to help folks with metastatic melanoma, but all these other cancers, it will just be a game changer. And so I want to do everything I can. So it's just such an exciting time to be able to, tell people about who I am and what I did and, the importance of it all, because it's just, there's, melanoma is unfortunately the cancer that gave cancer a bad name. And because of all the melanoma research and treatments, that's how they're able to find all these other treatments for other cancers and everything. And so just to be able to network and engage not only with all the other patients, but, to the other researchers and foundations and, the doctors as well. So they can kind of understand like the dynamic of, medically treating cancer patients has got to be more patient focused, with patient engagement. Patients need to be partners, not like the other way around to where it's just you listen to what they say and you say okay and walk away. It needs to be literally a partnership.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
this kind of, just getting your voice out there and being able to have people hear it before it actually happens to them. If anything ever does happen, they can go, oh, I remember so-and-so talking about it. I heard about this. And, you're not finding out after the fact of what to do, always, because like I said, you got to stay ahead of it rather than behind it, trying to chase it.